Hello. Well, it's been a minute, but I am coming out of my retirement just temporarily, just for this. This is not an ongoing thing, because there was a garment that was requested more than anything that I never got to, and I feel bad about, and I'm gonna try and fix that now. And that obviously it's in the title, and it's literally sitting up on the screen. That is a Saree. Now, draped garments are some of the most difficult garments to make in Marvelous Designer because generally when you're draping stuff, you need a lot of dexterity, and you don't have that in Marvelous Designer. So we need to come up with alternate methods for creating something like a Saree. And this is not just a Saree. It is very specifically a Saree, but a lot of these methods can be and should be applied to other draped garments that you work on in Marvelous Designer. So with that out of the way, and yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm doing okay. I'm pretty busy, but I did want to make this video for a while, and so now I'm finally doing it. Okay, so let's get started with an Indian Saree. All right, let's go ahead and just jump right into this Saree. So you'll notice I've already made some undergarments, and they're not just for modesty. They are actually really important to be able to have something for the Saree to attach to. There'll be points where you will need to like sew down the Saree or like pin it, and having these undergarments underneath is extremely important. I also made them with a fairly stiff fabric, not stiff in the way like rigid stiff, but just very high bend and stretch settings so that when the fairly heavy Saree is attached to it, the undergarments don't sag and drape, but they can kind of hold it up. So that's what I've done here. Now let's go ahead and talk about the fabric we'll be using to actually drape the Saree. So I'm just going to use this this default 5.2 fabric here. And that is like the default fabric. It's in the presets. The only change I'm going to make is I'm going to change the bending warp down to like 27, and we'll change the bending bias to like 25. Get these bends a little bit closer and the bending weft to like 21. So yeah, do something like that. I think the stretch and shear are fine. I'm going to turn down the weight to like 15 just so it's not quite so heavy. Yeah, and those are going to be the fabric properties we are going to use for this Saree. Now let's look at how we actually need to approach a Saree, because as I mentioned earlier in the intro, we do not have the natural dexterity of our fingers in Marvelous Designer, or in this case Clo3d, but again, I'm using Clo3d, but anything I'm doing here you can do in Marvelous Designer as well, so don't worry about that. But anyway, so when you look at a Saree, there's actually only 3 elements in here that really matter. And that is the hip pleat right here, the shoulder pleat, and this kind of area that tucks in under the hip pleat. Everything else in here doesn't really matter because everything else is just draping from those 3 points. They're naturally falling. You're not doing anything to them. So when we look at this and try and figure out how to make this, what we need to focus on are those 3 points, and we just need to make those 3 points and then attach everything together, and that's pretty much it. Now obviously there's a lot of little tricks and nuances to this, but by and large that is the approach that you need to take with the Saree, or really any draped garment at all. Just look at find the pleated elements or whatever structural elements exist on it, make those, and then just kind of extend it out and let everything drape. So that's the approach. What we're going to be starting with is this hip pleat. So let's go ahead and get started on the hip pleat because that is a tricky bit. So let's go ahead and get to that. All right, so to make this hip pleat, the first thing we want is a waistband. And this is one of the reasons I have these undergarments in. And these shorts here, they have a waistband. And having a waistband is very important because that is what this hip pleat is going to attach to. So whenever you make your undergarments, make sure you have a waistband to work with. This waistband, I'm actually going to merge this together And we will remove the linked editing like that, and I'll just convert this to a curve point. And there we go. Okay, so I just want this to be one long piece. Okay, so now let's make this hip pleat. And if you'll remember in some of my other tutorials, I talk about pleats a lot. And pleats are really just, they seem complex and fancy, but all a pleat is 3 layers of fabric, right? Or in this case, 2 layers of fabric, you know, if it's just a single pleat. But they are 2 or 3 layers of fabric stacked on top of each other, and then one edge is, you know, is merged with the other edge. So whenever you see a pleat, you have to think of it, you don't have to, but it is a very good way to think of it as 2 separate pieces that are just completely separate, stacked on top of each other. Because in Marvelous Designer, it's very easy to take the 2 open edges over here, sew them together, and merge them together. So you can do that at any time. So whenever you see a pleat, don't think of it as just like some crazy thing you don't understand. Just think of it as 2 stacked layers of fabric. Now, that becomes really important on this hip pleat here, because these hip pleats are not just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. They are like 12 layers of fabric stacked on top of each other, because there are like 6 or 7 pleats in there. So what we need to do is stack 14 or 16 or 12 layers of fabric on top of each other. Let's do that. Okay, this is where it gets fun. All right. And this is a modification of the way I do standard pleats. This is that same technique, just done a lot more times. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is drag out a rectangle of fabric, and this rectangle of fabric needs to be about the width of the pleat that is under here. So that's like, you know, crap, I don't even know, 15 centimeters. It's about as wide as you want it to be, or you need it to be. So in this case, I'm going to make it about, let's go a little bit wider here, about that wide, okay? Now, I'm going to sew this to the top of my waistband. We'll get it, you know, maybe a little bit more centered. I'm not too worried about making this exactly centered or anything. Okay, now this sewing needs to be turned. So set your sewing line type to turn. Now, one very important thing we're going to need to do with this is we're going to need to go into the, let's see, select this and go into the additional collision and rendering thickness. Now, I don't know if I've ever talked about this, but this is like one of the most important things when it comes to stowing multiple layers of clothing, and that is these collision and rendering thicknesses. So the collision thickness is easy to understand, because the collision thickness is like an invisible buffer around the fabric. If you increase the collision thickness, we'll increase that up to 5, you can see that it kind of pushes everything out. So the like invisible buffer in the center of the fabric pushes out, and you get a little bit more collision thickness to the fabric. Now this rendering thickness, a lot of people don't even touch this, because they're like, well, rendering, I'm just using this, well, let's go to single textured sided surface. So it doesn't even matter to me that, you know, it visibly gets thicker, because when you turn on the rendering thickness in this thick textured surface view, we'll turn this back on to 5, you can see that it visibly gets thicker, right? But the rendering thickness is secretly super, super important, because the rendering thickness is what dictates the length of a turned sewing line. So you can see here, I have both my rendering and collision thickness set to 5, and this is sitting really nice and flat. But let's say we go back to the default settings of when you make a piece of fabric like this, you're going to go in, you just make a default piece of fabric. The default settings for the rendering and collision thickness are 2.5 collision and 0 rendering. What that does, and let's just set that up to 0.5. My microphone behind my camera, so it's a little tricky to type. Okay, so this is the default settings, and when we do this, you can see that that turned sewing line essentially shrinks down, but the collision thickness is thick, and so you get this like buckling on the edge. It's really important to keep your collision thickness and rendering thickness the same amount at all times pretty much. And this really should be the default settings. I always have to go in and set these both to 1 whenever I'm working, because that will make your turned seams sit flat. And it's going to be very, very important that your turned seam sits flat right here. So that's the little PSA about collision and rendering thickness. Set them both to 1. Okay, so we've created our first element of the pleat, of this hip pleat. So let's go ahead and use the layer clone over. And if you've seen me make pleats, this is familiar to you, but the layer clone, so you right click layer clone over, and what this does, this does a copy paste, but it will place the second piece of fabric exactly above or exactly below the piece that you're layer cloning on top of or below. So you can see layer clone over, boom, it puts it on top. So now we need to go down and make like 12 or 14 or I don't know, a lot of these. I think we'll do 14. That'll give us like 7 pleats, because again, the pleat is, in this case, it's 2 layers of fabric, so 14 layers of fabric gives us 7 pleats. Oh, we can't do that yet. I forgot a very important step. The other thing we need to do is we need to distribute internal lines between the segments here. So we're gonna distribute about 12, we'll do about like 1 centimeter wide pleats here. So we'll do about 12 of those. Okay, I think that's right, yeah, 12. Okay, so we just want to distribute these lines. We don't need to do anything else to these right now. All right, so let's go ahead and start layer cloning over. Layer clone over. Oops, layer clone over. This will take a minute. How many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We'll do 2 more. Clone over. Layer clone over. Okay. So now we've made a whole bunch of copies. Now, a couple things. When you do this, it does instance all these patterns. Now, I don't want these to be instanced, so we need to go in and just select everything, right click, remove the linked editing. The other thing it does is it sews them all together. I actually don't want these sewn together, at least not this much, because it also sews these internal lines together and it sews all the edges. So I'm just going to go in and we're going to delete all the sewing. Actually, I don't want to delete this top sewing like that, but we'll just delete all that other sewing. Now I do want these to be sewn together. So I'm just going to go back in and we're going to sew the tops back together. So I want to sew all the tops back together. So well, you've got to go back in and sew all of these like this. So. Wait a minute. Okay. I think I did that wrong. Right. Sometimes you start zoning out and you just accidentally sew a top to a bottom or a bottom to a top. Right, did I do that right? Okay, I think I got them all. I feel like I might have missed one in there. We'll check. Okay, but the other thing you want to do, again, you want to switch all of these sewing lines to turned. Really important. Make sure these are turned sewing line types. Let's simulate these and see. Okay, that looks right. I'm actually going to turn on the thick textured surface. I do like seeing it thick. Okay, so that is exactly what we're looking for. Because now we can go in and actually make the stair step to this pleat. So this pleat, basically each one of these internal lines that we made indicates like where a stair step happens. So all we need to do is go in and say, okay, this first step, basically I want it to go out that far. But this second one, we're gonna go in by 1. Next one, we're gonna go in by 2. Next one, we're gonna go in by 3, 4, and so on until we get all the way up. All right, and then you just right click and cut. So we're gonna cut those apart. And then we can delete all these. like so. Okay, now we also have a stair step on the opposite side, but we have to be careful here because we can't just go in and say, okay, let's cut off here, 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 here. They have to be staggered, right? Because this end, so actually let's go back to our textured surface, right? So this and this gets sewn together here, and then this here has to be an open edge because this edge right here is going to connect back in to the Saree down here. So we need to cut from this one. So it's going to be this one, and then all the way back up. So 2, 2, 3, 3. But you can see we're staggering the stair step here on the back side. 4, 5, and then we don't want this one cut, the last one. Okay, so yeah, this last piece, you do not want to actually cut that because we're going to do something else with that in a second here. So let's go ahead and cut these. Let's, again, delete all this stuff. Oh, don't delete that last one. Okay, there we go. And we'll delete all of these. Now, okay, so this is starting to look like what we want, but you can see it's kind of hanging down. We need to sew everything back up to the top. Now you might say, oh, that's going to be a pain to do, but it's really not that bad. Because we cut these correctly, we can use our free sewing. So let's go to our free sewing tool. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew this edge right here. And because we have, we cut these apart, it actually cuts the sewing apart. So when we use our free sewing, it'll snap to the right point. So if we go from here to here on this top layer, and we're going to start right here because we want this edge here to match up to the start of this sewing back here. And it's fine because again, this is a turned sewing line type, or this one up here. So let's do that. And it'll be easier to see if we just do it and you can watch how this works. So this edge, and again, it snaps, you're going to sew from there to there. Okay, now we're going to go to the next one. Now we don't want to do this, the next one down. We want to do this one, right? Because this one's the open edge. You don't want to sew the top piece. You want to sew the bottom piece here. So it's essentially the same thing. You're going to take one and skip the next one and just do every other one. And again, because the sewing lines are divided, it should snap to the right point. So we sewed this one. So now we're going to sew this one. We keep going like so. We're just going to go down again. We're going to skip that. We're going to go to this one. And these sewing lines do a really good job of snapping to the correct point. So everything is correct. Skip that one, this one. And then we've got this last one. Let's see. Actually, do we need to sew the last one? Yeah, I believe so, yes. Or no, actually we don't need to. Okay, so we don't need to actually sew this last one. Right, because this is the one that's staggered. So we end on that one there. Okay, and then again, you want to go in, select all these, make sure they are set to a turned sewing line. And now all of these should go right in like that. And now we are holding really, really nice. Now this is the point where in a real Saree, they would take it and they would like take all these edges and tuck them up over the waistband. I will not be doing that. That is just a step too far. That is just way too much collision, way too much fabric. So I'm gonna try and make this Saree as accurately as possible, except in this one area where, you know, normally you would tuck that fabric up and over. We're just going to hold it together and have that open raw edge. So it's just a step too far to make it that accurate. But this is very, very close still. Okay, so we can already see how this pleat is starting to come together. Now let me make sure mentally that I'm doing this correctly. If we've forgotten any steps. No, I think we're actually ready to make the pleat. So again, like I was saying before, a pleat is just those two layers of fabric with one edge essentially sewn and merged together. So we just need to sew these edges together, like that edge and then merge them together. So let's go ahead and just sew these edges closed. So the first edge, yeah, I want to sew is this edge to this edge. And I do this. One moment, make sure I did this. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I did do that right. Okay, so we're gonna sew this edge to this edge, and then we're just gonna go down the line, okay? Go down the line like so. Now remember, this edge up here, we want that to be the open edge, so we're gonna start sewing this edge to this edge, so kind of staggered, whereas these two edges are here, these back sides are gonna be staggered, and we're gonna go back down the other side. All right, and we don't need to worry about that one. Let's go ahead and simulate, make sure we've done that right. Okay, so now we can merge these all together. But before we do that, if we look at our thick textured surface, we need to be sure to flip the normals because again, when you just layer clone over it, the normal direction is not going to be, the facing of the fabric is not going to be correct. So let's just select all, every other piece that is flipped like this. And then we can right click in the 3D window and find flip normal. I have this set to a hotkey. I don't remember where the, there it is, flip normal. Okay, so now all the directions of the fabric are going in the correct direction. And, oh, you know what? There is one other thing that I need to do. Okay, so this last pleat here, you see how it comes down and goes all the way under? I actually want that. That's very important. You want this piece to be long on the very bottom. Then we're going to layer clone under. Or actually, I guess layer clone over to get it to go in the right normal direction. Okay, and so we essentially want this to, these are going in and out, in and out, in and out. And then we want this one to go long all the way back and then all the way back out on this very last pleat. And I usually leave this step to the very end. It just makes it easier to visually or just step by step be like, okay, I need to do all these regular stair step pleats and I've got this long one at the end. So we're gonna do it in the same way we did all these others. I'm gonna get rid of that sewing. We'll remove the linked editing. And I'm gonna sew top to top. And we're gonna set that sewing on top to turned. And let's turn all this other stuff off so we can actually see what we're doing. Hide that, hide the avatar. Okay, there we go. Okay, now I want to flip the normals right. And actually, let's move everything up. Get some space here. Okay. Sorry. There's a lot of pieces going on. Got to get organized. Okay, I'm just going to move this, physically move this out a little bit so we have space for this last piece that I created to simulate. And again, that's sewn to the top of this other piece here. And then what we need to do is sew, let's see. We need to sew this edge over here shut. So let's do that. Oh, wait, what is this edge? Oh, it's because I flipped the normals, so things get a little confusing. It's good not to flip your normals till the very end, otherwise things do tend to get confusing. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew those together. And then we want to flip the normals on this piece right here. So again, all our normal directions are going in the same way. Okay. And that is the entirety of the pleat. So now all our normals are flipped. We are ready to start merging everything. They're all hooked in correctly. Okay, let's go ahead and merge this. And again, this is going to be take a minute, merge, 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 merge. Boy, I wish they had a repeat last action hotkey. That'd be so helpful. Let's see. Okay, that is all merged. Now, we actually don't need these internal lines anymore. They've served their purpose, so we can delete all these. Now, a really cool thing I think a lot of people don't know about is you can actually lock all internal lines, or you can lock all pattern outlines. So if we just lock all pattern outlines, and that's this right up here, you can just drag and select, and then it just selects all these internal lines. You can delete them, and then you can unlock the pattern outlines. And there you go. You got rid of all your internal lines that we no longer need. And if we simulate, we have now created this hip pleat. Obviously, it's not long enough, but that's simple. You just extend it out. But now, I hope you were able to follow that. If not, just go back. I think this is okay in terms of following along, because this is kind of the hardest part of the Saree to get correct. So it's really important we do this right. But basically, it's just that layer clone, making sure all your normals are flipped and getting everything sewn together correctly, and remembering to make sure all your thicknesses are right. And once you do that, you have created this nice hip pleat that is attached to your waistband, and we can just start extending it out. Now, don't extend it all at once, because that will cause a lot of like collision issues. I just like to kind of incrementally start pulling it down, like so. And don't worry if it like kind of it gets a mess at first. Marvelous Designer actually does a really good job of resolving the cloth. So just start incrementally pulling this down. Yeah, see, that might have been too much. Oh, the other thing I'm gonna do, I work at a fairly low particle distance because I do have a pretty good computer, but there's a lot of fabric here, so you're gonna need to raise your particle distances. So I'm gonna go up to 12 on this. I was working at 7. That'll help a lot. But you can see the higher your particle distances, the more it's gonna like bulk out. So when you get these high particle distances, don't be afraid that the fabric is like so thick. If you lower your particle distances, it flattens out quite a bit, pretty well. But just in terms of speed, we do need to raise that particle distance up. Okay. Just keep extending, and that might have been a little bit ambitious. Did it? No. Okay, so here's one of the issues. Again, like I mentioned, this Saree is pretty heavy, and I did turn on, I bonded my fabric, but maybe not strong enough. So I'm actually going to do like a really high bond. And a bond, that's when you turn your fabric. It turns your fabric orange. It's basically a fabric override. It's not really an override. It's like additive, not straight override, but it's basically an override. So I'm just going to turn my stretch and bend really high on this waistband so it doesn't sag as much. Okay, there we go. That's a little better. Okay. And there you go. There is the first element of the Saree, the hip pleat, which is the hardest part of the Saree. Now we have it. All right. We've got the hip pleat. Now let's go ahead and make the shoulder part. But before we do that, let's finish off the skirt so it actually wraps all the way around. And the rest of the skirt is just a simple, just a simple wrapped skirt. So there's nothing fancy about this. What I like to do is I like to just grab this edge right here, and we're going to right click and offset pattern outline. We're just going to offset, by some amount. Make sure this create internal line is selected. So we'll just offset that, and that's just going to extend the edge out. What I like to do is also cut and sew. I do like to section out this Saree just so it makes it easier to work on if, there's sections of the Saree rather than one giant piece. You have to manage all at the same time. So I'm going to cut and sew that. And we're just going to extend this out. And again, I'm going to sew it to the top of this waistband. Sew and sew. Just sew that all the way along. And then extend this out to what matches. And this is one piece where I might turn the particle distance up even more because there's not a lot of detail in this like flat piece that wraps around. So I don't need a super high particle distance. So that's one area where I will turn it up. And then we'll go ahead and just extend this out again. And just wrap this all the way around. Oops, too much. So that one goes there, sews on, and I want to sew it back to this pleat right here. Normally, on a real Saree, it does wrap around like twice, but for the sake of collisions and a whole bunch of fabric, I like I'm not going to wrap it around quite as much as a real Saree. It'll just make everything faster and easier to manage. It'll still look correct. but there are some places you do have to cheat for, you know, performance sake, and this is one of those areas. So we're just going to go all the way back around, back to where this hip pleat starts right here. Or I guess, well, actually, no, this just isn't long enough. Let's extend that out. Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to go into there. And again, we want to make sure that these are set to turned seams. Okay. That'll make those nice and flat. And we have our correct collision and rendering because we offset from this piece, which already has the correct values. Okay. Let's actually just a little bit. I am going to go a little bit wider. Like, this doesn't exactly match the width of the waistband, just because the hips on this character are so large. It needs, you know, if I just made this 1-to-1, the fabric wouldn't quite fit around the hips. So I'm okay with a little bit of gathering on this waistband here. Okay, so that looks fine. Now let's go ahead and look at the shoulder. So the shoulder is just, again, it's a pleat, right? It's a zigzag, or I don't know what they'd call that pleat. It's just like the Z-shape pleat. And we already know how to do that. It's very simple. But what we need to do is we actually need to match it with the width here. Like, this width of the Saree is how wide it needs to be up here. So it's really pretty easy to match that. And I'll show you how I like to do it. So again, I'm going to go to this edge, and this is the edge of the pleat over here. We're going to right click, offset pattern outline. I'm just going to offset by some amount. We'll extend this out. Okay, so now this part of the Saree right here, this is the part that's going to loop up and around the back, and it's going to go whoop around, and it's going to hook up into that shoulder pleat. So I'm just going to extend that out a little bit for now, and then I'm going to cut and sew. So we've got this piece separated off, but still sewn on. And then I'm going to copy and paste this. So we're just going to make a copy of this. Now what I want to do is I want to distribute the internal lines. Or distribute them down this way. And you'll see why in a second. Okay, because this is a little bit hard to explain. Maybe it's not, I'm just not very good at explaining it. So I'm gonna do like 10 divisions. And these divisions are going to be the width of the shoulder pleat up here. So just make as many divisions as you think you want the shoulder pleat up here to be wide. So in this case, 10 looks about right. So we'll distribute them like that. And then I'm just going to take one single one and I'm going to cut it off. And now I'm going to delete all the rest. And this is going to become our shoulder pleat, right? And the reason I distributed this, and I didn't just make some random size, is now I know when I layer clone, I can layer clone 10 more of these, and I will get the exact width or the exact length of the Saree. So everything is going to match up. And so that's why I did that. So really, it was easy to explain. I'm just, you know, you had to get there. Okay. Now what we need to do, again, this is going to be a part where we do need to connect this to the bodice here. And that's one of the reasons I have this undergarment here, is so we can actually sew to the undergarment. You can do things like pin and tack. I'm not a big fan of that. If possible, I always try and sew to another garment. Sewing is kind of the most secure way of connecting one piece of fabric to something else is sewing. So I like to sew this instead of pin or tack it. Now I'm going to make just an internal line that goes all the way down like this. So we can just make that internal line there. And now I can sew that to this top shoulder seam, because I already have a nice place to sew it. I think this is going to be a little bit wider, so let's match that up 1-to-1. Simulate like so. And there we go. This is the start of our shoulder pleat. Now, you should already know by now what's coming, and that is a lot of layer cloning over. So let's go ahead and do that. So layer clone over, and distributed 10 times. I think that gives me 11 divisions. I think that's right. So I think I have to do 10, 11 in total. Well, we can check. Layer clone over, layer clone over, layer 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Over. And clone over. Man, is that right? Okay, we're gonna have to check this. Snap those together. Let's see if they match the width. Okay, yeah, that is correct. Cool. Math worked out. Excellent. Okay, so we've got all that. We removed the linked editing, and now again we do need to delete the sewing. So let me kind of distribute these more evenly. So we can just do this. Oh my goodness. There we go. Okay. Okay. Now again, because we layer cloned, we've got all this sewing that I do not want. But in this case, I actually do want this center sewing right here. I do want all of those center sewings to be preserved. So when I select all this sewing, I can hold shift to say no, don't, or deselect all this middle sewing, and then just delete all this extra sewing. So we've got all the sewing on the outside deleted, but we kept all this internal sewing, and that's just gonna hold our pleat so it doesn't just unfurl and fall apart. This is gonna hold everything together. So it's really important to get that central sewing on there. So if we simulate, again, did that right? Yeah. Looks good. And we've got our turn seam, which gives us our correct collision and rendering. Okay. So now we just go in and we do so this side alternate, this side, this side, this side, this side to get our pleats. So we will start and we'll just do this to this. Oh, I guess we're starting at the bottom. Weird. Okay, and then this to that, and then this to this, top to top, bottom to bottom, top to top, bottom to bottom, top to top, bottom. Oh no. Okay, this is. Yeah, just make sure you're doing it right. Okay, I think that is correct. So let's check that. Make sure we did this. Okay, yeah, there we go. So now we've got this nice shoulder pleat. Now, the other thing I like to do here is this. You can this center seam down the middle here. It's a little noticeable. It's a little big. I like to shrink this and just make it much smaller, right? So to do that, I just select all these pieces. We're going to right click on them and we're going to instance these. So we instance all these patterns. So now we can go into one. We can just grab this internal line here. We're going to get our transform point segment tool up there, double click the center pivot, and we're just going to shrink this down so it's much smaller. So we've just got a much smaller little point right in the middle that's holding everything down. That's all we need to do there. Now we can go back in and I want to remove the linked editing because I don't want these linked. I want those removed. And so there we go. Oh, and don't forget when you do this, because you've got this piece sewn to the shoulder pad and you shrunk that down, all of a sudden your sewing line up to the shoulder seam is you have to make sure that matches lengthwise. Okay. And this is nice too, because now you can move this sewing line up and down the shoulder to kind of control where this pleat sits on the shoulder. So I'm going to move it up pretty high on the shoulder here. There we go. Okay, and again, now we can look, let's flip the normal. So we want to flip, wait, why that one? What happened here? Oh, this one should be on top. What? Okay. That one got a little bit. Wait a minute. Is this organized correctly? Okay, I think that's organized correctly. Yeah. Okay, that one just got misordered somehow. Okay, but that's fine. Okay, just select every other piece here and then flip the normals. So all your normal directions are going in the right way, and then we can start merging. So there's just a lot of merging happening with a Saree. A lot of merging. Merge. And I don't need all these extra little points in here, so I'll just get rid of those. Let's simulate and see. There we go. And again, because the reason it puffs out like that is because I have a pretty low particle distance, and just naturally when you, you know, the fabric is going to want to kind of puff up like this. So this is fine. We will lower the particle distance later and change some fabric settings, so hopefully it flattens out a little bit more. Well, it will. But for now, this is fine. And again, it's holding, it's not like falling apart because we've got it all sewn together. So now all we need to do is just extend this part down, right? So that's going to be this edge over here, right? Let's see this edge. Yeah. So again, you're just going to do the same thing where you're going to incrementally extend this out. Don't go too far at once, otherwise you do get a lot of collision issues. Now, one thing that happens when you do this is it does start to unravel. That's one of the reasons I have it sewn together like this. And a lot of times, it's at this beginning stage, you do want it to kind of stick together as you go down. So later on, you can kind of you know, unfurl it the way you want it to. But for now, you want it to kind of hold its, you know, stack as you move it down. So what I like to do is I like to extend this down like this, simulate, and then not too much. And then I'm going to grab all these points and I'm going to hold shift. I'm going to copy and paste, hold shift, so it kind of locks to this axis, and then just move these down. And so that way, again, it's going to, you know, sew all that together so the stack won't unfurl. And then again, I'm going to extend these out. And that just makes this easier to manage, basically. And later on, I will get rid of these points, but for now, it's, you know, it's very helpful just to have this stack so you can kind of adjust the entire stack without it falling apart completely. Out. That should be enough. Now I don't care if it's going to unfurl after this. Okay, so now let's just extend this out a little bit more. And then you will need to extend the back out. And you could do the same thing to the back if you don't want it to just completely unfurl. Just to copy and paste these. Okay, so now we've got our two main areas pretty much complete. Now we just need to connect this to that. So we'll do that next. Now all we need to do is just connect everything up. So let's take this piece here, and this is the shoulder pleat, and we need to connect this with the end of the hip pleat right here. So this hip pleat comes up, goes around, and hooks in with this. Now this is about the only time where I'm going to use pins. I don't like pins. I shouldn't say I don't like them. Most of the time, pins just cause problems. And I would definitely recommend to try and use pins as little as possible and only use them a little bit, and once you're done with them, get rid of them. So pins are, of course, these little yellow things. You press the W button or the W key and you click and it creates a pin, and that just locks a point in space. And you'll notice in most of this tutorial, in all of it, I have never used a pin once. And that is on purpose, because the more you use pins, the harder it becomes to manipulate cloth, because it is really difficult to manipulate cloth in Marvelous Designer in 3D space. So just don't do it. It will cause pain and sadness, and it's just not a good time. But in this specific case, I do need to kind of wrap this around and pull this and have it, you know, stay suspended in space. So this is one of the very few times that I will use pins. Again, I'm hesitant to even do this because I don't want people to go, well, you know, he used them, so I guess I can too. No. That is not what this is about. This is a very specific situation where pins are useful, but in pretty much every other case, I would say just don't use them, because they are on. They are like they are one of the four horsemen of the causes of bad cloth simulation. And yeah. Anyway, I'm going to use them in this case, but only to temporarily hold this fabric where I need it to, which is to wrap around. And even this, you see, it's clunky and not fun. You know, even this, it's like, but this is, there's not really a better way to do this. Okay. And then we're just going to hope this resolves. Mm-hmm. Around. Okay, I don't need to get this like super close though, which is nice. I just need to kind of get it in the right general place. This is one of the things right here. When you are working with a large amount of fabric like this, it just becomes really unwieldy. Things kind of, you know, get stuck in the avatar. Oh my goodness, that is really stuck. Oh, it's around the foot. Great. And so a lot of these processes that I'm showing you in this tutorial are designed to avoid this situation, right? So even if something like layer cloning and merging all this stuff takes a little bit longer, it avoids the frustration of like having your cloth do crazy things and then trying to constantly fix it. Because when you just kind of break things down into the most simple elements and do things the way I did here, you avoid this kind of frustration, which is a thing that just sucks the joy out of Marvelous Designer. When you're just constantly trying to fix the fabric from doing all kinds of weird stuff. Okay, there we go. That adventure is now completed. We have gotten this edge close to this edge. So now we just need to sew them together. That's literally it. So we're just going to sew these together and hopefully this will resolve okay. Oh, let's get rid of this pin. Delete, select the pin, there we go. Let's see what happens. Oof, this is gonna be tough. Okay, you know what I should do? I should, and this is one of the reasons that I separated all these panels out, so I can go in and I can deactivate the pattern. So we're gonna deactivate that pattern there, and that way, you know, this won't collide with that, and we'll hopefully, much better. Now, is that right? Okay, I think that's fine. Okay. Now we do have to reactivate these pieces, and we're going to have some issues with layering, but fortunately we can turn our layers on. So let's see, this needs to be under this. We're going to set that to layer -1, and I think that's all we need to do. So let's just set this to layer -1, and hopefully that will just pop to the inside. There we go. And then once you're done with the layers, turn them off. Layers are another one of the 4 horsemen of bad cloth simulation. There are pins, layers, freezing, and there's something else. They're like the big, those are like my 4 horsemen of things that just make fabric simulation not work right. Anyway, turn your layers off once you're done with them. Okay. There we go. All right. So now obviously we need to kind of tighten this up, and because everything is like segmented out, it's really easy to tighten things up. Actually, let's fix some of the IP we have here. Okay, there we go. That's out. Okay, so to tighten this up, you just need to pull either this back or this forward. That's going to start tightening things up. And again, we've got it connected up here, so that's going to hold on to the shoulder. And that's going to come drape down. Pull this in a bit. Tighter up in here. Okay. Move this back. Now, even as tight as this bodice is, it still is getting pulled. The sewing is getting pulled, so it's kind of pulled back a little bit, but not too bad. It seems okay. And then I can get rid of all of these little points, the things that are sewn together right here, because I do want this to unfurl a little bit up here. Okay, that's fine. Smooth things out. And I think I will lower the particle distance up here. So let's turn this back down to 7. So hopefully this will lay a little bit flatter. Nicer. Okay, that's a little bit better. There. Okay. The other thing I like to do is I do like to remove this top layer of sewing right here. Why is this sewn? Oh, that's right. So the top layer is actually down here now, I think. Yeah, that's the top layer. Because everything got flipped around. Because I like this top layer to just be free, you know, sitting just freely on top rather than constrained with the sewing. There we go. And this is a time when you do start using the hand to kind of move things into the position you want and, you know, doing all that fun stuff now that everything is organized the way it should be. Why did this get twisted? Did I? Hold on. No, that's right. That's just, okay. We're good. I thought my sewing was reversed there, but it is not. Okay. Probably need to lower the particle distance on that too, but we'll do that later. Again, this is, a Saree is a lot of fabric, so it will slow down your computer. There's a lot of stuff happening on this. Okay, so this is all wrapping around the way it should be. That's all kind of correct. Okay, now for this last area, and that is this tuck right under the pleats here. Now, unlike everything else, I actually do not have a good method for this. I really don't. In a real Saree, or I don't know, in the tutorial that this lady did, she just used a pin to like kind of, you know, just gather all the fabric together and pin it together under this pleat, which is basically what I'm going to do. I don't really have a better way of doing this. No fancy tricks here. So I'm going to cut this apart because I do want to just hide this top pleat so I can see what's under here. So I actually need to cut this pleat apart right here. We'll cut and sew that. That way I can just hide this. There we go. Let me merge this together. And okay, now we can kind of see what's going on underneath. And now we can just go in, and I like to use these little tacks and just kind of tack. And that's gonna pinch that fabric together. You might even need to like pinch it and like attach it over to the shorts down here. Let's turn these back on so we can see those. Oh, they're not active. Whoa, deactivated the shorts. Where's my layers? Layers. Why am I not seeing layers? Oh, right, the bonds guys. Duh. Okay, layer. We're gonna change that to layer -1, just so these pants can be on. There we go. Okay, and then turn them off. Okay, and that way you can use the tacks to kind of take a tack, move this over, so you can pull this whole piece over this way like that. And I basically just use a bunch of tacks to try and kind of get this effect, you know, of like pinching the fabric together and tightening it up in this area. And then this should just go nice. Okay, we do need to lower the particle distance on this one for sure. Go down to 7. And also we're going to need to adjust some fabric settings, it looks like. Because these are not the right fabric settings. You know what this is? I pinned all this stuff way too high up. Let's lower these pins. So it's like down here, I think. Yeah. So you can get that stuff all down there. And this probably I've always had trouble like getting it tight enough, you know, around the back. And I think all that material just goes under the pleat, and I haven't really done a good job of like being able to pull all this fabric under the pleat. That is pretty difficult. Again, this is like the one area where you do still have to do it kind of manually, which makes it a little bit more difficult. Let's try pinning some stuff in here. But this is the process to making a Saree. You get all the elements in there correctly. I mean, this one doesn't look the best. I've made better Sarees. Let's see. Boy, I'm a little bit annoyed. I thought this would turn out a little bit better. I could go in and let's adjust some fabric properties. But if you want to make a Saree, I would definitely say start here. This process is not optimized, right? I haven't made like a whole bunch of Sarees, and the more I make, the more I'm like, oh, I can, you know, do this. So, you know, try and make this better. Figure out your own shortcuts and little tricks to make it better. But I think this is a really good place to start, because a lot of these pleats are very complex, and if you just try and drape them like, you know, moving things around with a little pinchy finger, it becomes unmanageable. So I feel like this is a pretty good place to start. And you should be able to get a pretty good Saree if you do these steps or some modification of these steps to make, you know, some other type of Saree. Okay, I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna end the tutorial here. I hope this was helpful. Draping garments is tough, as you have seen. It is very difficult. But I think if you think about draping in a way where it's just like break it apart into like its simple, most basic pieces, and then just connect everything up, it tends to make draped garments a lot easier to make. But yeah, I know a lot of people wanted me to do a Saree, and I never got to one, so I'm trying to get to it now. I hope this was helpful, and I don't know when I'll see you again, but maybe one day, maybe, who knows. All right, see you guys. All right, future Daniel here, and I went ahead and just kind of fixed things, and I'm going to talk about the end result. So basically, I just had some inner penetrations and some fabric that was really having some problems getting resolved. So I had to undo a bunch, go back and to where it was stable, and then not do this. You know, I moved something around, or I think I used a layer. Anyway, I fixed that. And then I adjusted the pins. I just have a couple of simple pins under there. It's nothing fancy. It doesn't look great. I could probably use a few more pins to like get a few more nice drapes going into the hip. But I went in and I just added a few more of these sewing lines so that the pleats were a little bit more organized up here, and just kind of move things around, you know, adjusted things. And the big thing was the fabric properties. I went in and I made the stretch much lower. I don't know if I made it much lower, but the stretch is pretty low so it can drape. I added some buckling ratio and buckling stiffness. So I adjusted some fabric properties to get it to drape a little bit nicer. And then, lowered the particle distance. I think this is at 7. Yeah, it's at 7. And so the end result, this is a pretty nice Saree, pretty okay Saree. I mean, it could be better, but this will give you a pretty good result. you get these really nice pleats. The pleats are just awesome. I love the results you get with these pleats and everything. And then of course the pattern is, it's all divided up right now, but it is just a big rectangle pattern when you merge it all together, which is pretty cool. Oh, I don't want to merge that one because that's going to lower the particle distance. But yeah, if you merge these all together, you just get one big rectangle, which is what a Saree is. So there you go. That is a Saree. All right.